When you step into silence, something important happens that most people never anticipate. The noise stops. The constant emotional buffering you were providing disappears. There are no more messages, no more check-ins, no more reassurance. And in that quiet, reality has nowhere to hide. Silence doesn't punish, it reveals. While you were present, your attention softened discomfort. Your availability absorbed uncertainty. Your effort filled emotional gaps she didn't have to confront. When you withdraw calmly, without anger or explanation, those gaps reappear. And now, she has to feel them. At first, silence feels like relief to her. No expectations, no pressure, no emotional responsibility. But that phase doesn't last, because comfort isn't the same as fulfillment. Once routine returns and the novelty of freedom fades, the absence becomes noticeable. Not dramatically, but consistently. Silence removes distraction. There's no one to validate her choices in real time, no one to counterbalance doubt. She's left alone with her thoughts, and those thoughts start asking questions. Questions she didn't have to face when you were there. This is where emotional reality surfaces. Not in a single moment, but in fragments. A quiet evening, a familiar place, a situation where your presence used to be automatic, and now it isn't. That's when the emotional weight begins to settle in. Most men think being loud creates impact. In reality, presence does, and absence amplifies it. When you leave without drama, your absence doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like loss. Loss of familiarity, loss of stability, loss of emotional grounding. Silence also removes the option of revision. There's no conversation to reinterpret, no reaction to manage. The story becomes fixed, and fixed stories carry more weight than ongoing negotiations. When she can't adjust the narrative by interacting with you, she has to sit with it as it is. This is why chasing delays realization. Every time you reach out, you soften the consequence of distance. You provide emotional cushioning. Silence removes that cushion, and without it, feelings sharpen. What she experiences isn't guilt, it's awareness. Awareness of what your presence contributed. Awareness of the emotional labor you were carrying. Awareness of how it feels when that support is gone. And this awareness doesn't demand immediate action. It doesn't trigger panic. It settles slowly, quietly, which is why it's powerful. Silence also preserves dignity. You're not trying to be understood. You're not asking to be chosen. You're stepping back because your value doesn't need explanation. That posture alone reframes how you're remembered. In silence, she doesn't see you as someone who lost. She sees you as someone who chose self-respect over persuasion. And that shift changes the emotional balance completely. The key is that silence must be clean. No indirect messages, no checking in through mutual connections, no digital shadows. Silence only works when it's complete. When you remove yourself fully, emotional reality has space to emerge. This isn't about revenge, it's about alignment. You're not trying to make her feel anything. You're allowing her to feel what already exists. And once reality is felt without distraction, the process can't be reversed. That's when the cost of losing you begins to register. After silence begins, there's a phase that most people misunderstand. From the outside, it looks like she's fine, active, unbothered, living her life. And that surface-level freedom can make you question whether your absence even matters. But emotional loss doesn't announce itself immediately. It settles in quietly through routine and repetition. At first, the space feels light to her. There's relief in not having to coordinate, explain, or consider someone else's emotional rhythm. Independence feels refreshing, but that sensation is temporary, because freedom without connection eventually exposes what's missing. She doesn't wake up one day and think, I miss him. It happens in fragments. Small disruptions in routine. Moments that don't land the same way anymore. The absence shows up not as pain but as emptiness. She feels it in places where you used to exist without effort. A message she almost sends. A thought she catches herself having, a habit that no longer makes sense. These moments don't create panic, they create contrast. And contrast is where awareness begins. This is why she feels the absence before she ever admits it. Admitting loss requires vulnerability. Feeling it does not. So she experiences the emotional impact long before she gives it a name. What makes this phase powerful is its subtlety. There's no outlet for processing, no one to blame, no interaction to soften the edges. Just space, and space magnifies absence. She may distract herself, stay busy, surround herself with noise, but distraction doesn't erase awareness, it delays it. And when the distractions fade, the contrast returns. Loss is rarely felt all at once. It accumulates, quietly, repeatedly. Every time something feels slightly off, the mind registers it. And over time, those moments stack. This is also where memory shifts. Instead of focusing on conflict or distance, the mind recalls stability, familiarity, emotional grounding. Absence reframes what once felt normal into something valuable. This doesn't mean she's ready to reach out. Awareness precedes action. Feeling precedes acknowledgement, and acknowledgement takes time. The mistake most men make here is breaking silence too early. They interrupt the process right as awareness is forming. They replace absence with reassurance, and reassurance resets the emotional scale. Feeling the absence isn't punishment, it's realization, and realization requires uninterrupted space. She doesn't admit it outwardly because that would mean confronting her own role in the separation. So the process stays internal, quiet, personal. This is also where dignity matters. Your calm withdrawal makes the absence clean. There's no resentment attached to it, just space. And that makes the feeling harder to dismiss. She begins to notice what isn't there long before she ever says it out loud. And once absence is felt, it can't be unfelt. That's when the quiet cost of losing you begins to deepen. At some point during silence, something shifts internally, certainty fades. And when certainty disappears, curiosity takes its place. This is a critical moment because certainty is what allows someone to move on cleanly. Curiosity is what pulls the mind back. When you were present and predictable, your role in her life felt defined. She knew where you stood. She knew your availability. She knew the emotional access she had. And that certainty, even if it was comfortable, also made your presence easy to take for granted. Silence disrupts that. When you disappear without explanation or emotional residue, the narrative breaks. There's no new information to process, no reaction to analyze, just a missing piece. And the human mind hates missing pieces. Curiosity doesn't begin with longing, it begins with questions. What is he doing now? How is he feeling? Has he moved on? Has something changed? These questions don't come from regret at first, they come from uncertainty. And uncertainty is powerful because it pulls attention inward. When she doesn't know where she stands with you anymore, her focus turns back toward the connection. Not emotionally at first, but mentally. And mental engagement is the doorway to emotional engagement. This is why disappearing with dignity is so effective. You don't give her anything to react to, no anger, no bitterness, no pleas. Without emotional cues, the mind fills in the gaps on its own, and the stories it creates are often more compelling than reality. Certainty kills imagination. Curiosity feeds it. If you were to reach out during this phase, you would restore certainty instantly. She'd know you're still there, still accessible, still emotionally available, and curiosity would collapse into familiarity. This is also where social comparisons start to work against her expectations. She may see other people, talk to others, engage in new interactions, but comparison sharpens absence. What once felt normal becomes distinct when contrasted with something different. Curiosity isn't about wanting you back immediately, it's about reopening the emotional file she thought was closed. And once reopened, it doesn't shut easily. She starts noticing details she didn't before. Your consistency, your presence, your role in her emotional landscape. Silence reframes those qualities from assumed to absent. This phase can take time, and it's fragile. Curiosity grows only when it's uninterrupted. If you reinsert yourself emotionally, you answer the questions she was just beginning to ask. Another important element here is restraint. When curiosity replaces certainty, she may test the waters indirectly, watching stories, asking mutual contacts, revisiting shared spaces mentally. These are signs of attention turning back, not commitment. Your job during this phase is to remain unavailable without hostility. Curiosity only deepens when it's met with calm neutrality. This isn't manipulation. It's natural psychology. The mind seeks resolution, and silence delays resolution in a way that amplifies emotional value. Eventually, curiosity either fades or transforms. If it fades, it means emotional investment wasn't strong enough to sustain attention. If it transforms, it turns into reflection, comparison, and sometimes regret. But none of that can happen if certainty is restored too soon. Silence removes the safety of knowing, and without that safety, curiosity does what chasing never could. It brings her attention back to you on her own terms. After curiosity takes hold, the mind naturally begins to compare. This is not a conscious decision she makes, it's an automatic process. When something familiar disappears, the brain uses contrast to understand its value. And that's where emotional comparison begins. While you were present, your role blended into daily life. Your consistency, your support, your presence felt normal, not because it lacked value, but because it was reliable. Reliability is invisible until it's gone. Silence removes that baseline, and suddenly everything else is measured against what used to be. She may meet new people, have new conversations, experience new attention. On the surface, it looks like movement forward. But internally, comparison starts quietly. She notices what feels different, what feels lighter, what feels less grounding, and those observations accumulate. This is where absence sharpens contrast. New interactions might be exciting, but excitement isn't the same as emotional safety. Novelty doesn't replace familiarity, and attention doesn't replace connection. Over time, those differences become noticeable. Comparison doesn't mean idealization. She's not romanticizing you blindly. She's assessing emotional impact, how she felt around you, how regulated she felt, how stable the connection was compared to what she's experiencing now. This process happens most strongly in moments of vulnerability, when stress appears, when something goes wrong, when there's no one consistent to lean on. That's when the absence of emotional grounding becomes obvious. What's important here is that comparison only works in your favor if you left cleanly, without bitterness, without emotional residue. If the last version of you she remembers is calm and self-respecting, the contrast feels positive. If it was chaotic or needy, comparison works against you. Silence preserves the best version of you in her memory. No new mistakes, no emotional overexposure, just absence. And absence allows the mind to revisit the past selectively. This is also where emotional maturity plays a role. As distractions fade, depth becomes more important. Shallow connections lose appeal. Stability gains weight, and the mind naturally references what once provided that stability. Comparison isn't immediate, it unfolds over time, and it's reinforced through repetition. Each moment where something feels slightly off adds to the internal scale. This is why forcing contact interrupts the process. When you reappear too early, you remove contrast. You replace absence with presence, and presence renormalizes everything before comparison fully develops. The power of comparison lies in silence doing the work for you. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to remind her of your value. The contrast does that automatically. Eventually, what once felt ordinary becomes rare in memory, and rarity increases value. This doesn't guarantee action, but it deepens awareness, and awareness changes perception permanently. Once emotional comparison begins, the loss becomes clearer, not because you said anything, but because something important is missing. Regret doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't demand attention or announce itself loudly. It enters quietly, almost invisibly, and settles into the small spaces of everyday life. This is why most people misunderstand it. They expect regret to look like dramatic messages or sudden confessions. In reality, it shows up in silence. As emotional comparison deepens, the mind begins to revisit choices, not obsessively at first, but reflectively. She starts replaying moments, decisions, turning points. Not to rewrite history, but to understand it. This is where regret begins to form. Regret isn't about missing a person as much as missing a feeling. The feeling of being understood, of being emotionally supported, of having someone consistent. When those experiences are gone, their absence becomes more noticeable in quiet moments. Late at night, during pauses, in moments of emotional fatigue. That's when reflection happens. Not when life is busy or exciting, but when it slows down. And silence provides the space for those thoughts to surface. She may remember moments she once minimized. Times you showed patience. Times you stayed grounded. Times you provided stability without asking for credit. These memories don't feel important until they're absent. Regret also grows from irreversibility. Silence removes the illusion of endless access. When you don't reach out, don't explain, don't seek validation, the possibility of own doing feels less certain. And that uncertainty adds weight to past decisions. This doesn't mean she blames herself aggressively. Regret is rarely self-punishing. It's reflective, quiet, personal. It's the awareness that something meaningful was lost without fully understanding its value at the time. And here's the crucial part: regret only grows when there's no pressure. If you reinsert yourself emotionally, regret softens because the cost of loss disappears. Silence maintains that cost. Regret also isn't constant. It comes in waves, triggered by memories, familiar places, emotional needs that go unmet. Each wave reinforces awareness. This is why patience matters. Regret can't be rushed. It can't be demanded. It emerges organically when the mind has time to process without interference. You'll never see most of this. It happens internally, quietly. And that's what makes it powerful, because it's real. If regret turns into action, it won't come from desperation. It will come from clarity, and clarity only comes after reflection. Your role is not to wait for regret. It's to maintain self-respect and emotional distance. Regret is not the goal, alignment is. But when regret arrives in silence, it reshapes how loss is understood. And once that understanding settles in, it doesn't fade easily. After reflection and regret settle in, the emotional weight reaches a point where it seeks release, not through dramatic confession, but through subtle movement. This is the phase where silence begins to feel heavy rather than peaceful. And when silence becomes heavy, behavior changes. Reaching out doesn't start with a message. It starts with permission, internal permission to reconnect. And that permission only forms when fear is lower than desire, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of being ignored. All of that has to soften before action happens. This is why any return is rarely direct at first. It's cautious, indirect, low risk. Because emotionally, she's testing the ground before stepping forward. You might notice signs before words: increased attention, quiet monitoring, subtle reappearance. These aren't accidents. They're emotional probes, ways of checking whether connection is still possible without fully exposing herself. What matters here is how you've carried yourself throughout the silence. If your absence was clean and grounded, the path back feels safer. If it was chaotic or emotionally charged, fear stays high. This phase isn't about control, it's about safety, emotional safety. And silence, when held with maturity, creates that safety paradoxically by not forcing anything. If she does reach out, it won't come with certainty, it will come with hesitation. And that hesitation is a sign of sincerity, not weakness, because it means she's risking something. Your response here is critical. Overreaction breaks safety. Emotional flooding raises defenses. The goal is to meet movement with calm, not urgency. And sometimes movement doesn't come at all, not because the process failed, but because growth happened instead. Silence works whether she returns or not, because it recenters you. This is the final truth most people miss. The purpose of silence isn't to get someone back. It's to restore balance, to step out of emotional dependency, to reconnect with self-respect. When you do that, any reconnection happens from strength, not longing. If she comes back, it's because something real was recognized. And if she doesn't, it's because silence did its job in revealing what wasn't aligned. Either way, you win by staying grounded. And that's the quiet power of doing nothing.